Everyone. My name is Bastijn Ravenshorst, and yeah, like Hilke said, I will take you through the national regulation we drafted. So thanks a lot. It was already a lot of information to digest, so I hope you guys will hang in there, and hopefully I can also try to save you some time by following this presentation. Maybe you don't need to blow through all the pages of the regulation. So I will start off with a bit of explanation on the legislative process we have gone through. And then I will give you the headlines of the regulation itself, followed by a more detailed explanation on some subjects. I must say I have a bit of a cold, so I hope my voice will last throughout the session. And you can still hear me loud and clear at the end as well. So let's move on to the first slide indeed. So like Hilke explained already, alongside IDACS, we've been working on regulation to support and embed everything we worked out in IDACS in the Dutch law. And actually, it's good news that today we can announce that the regulation has been formally published in the good old-fashioned Staatscourant. So from now on, you will be able to find it there. So let me take you through the legislative process. The basis of all of this is, of course, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, which has already an article on user information. So we took that as a basis, and we further implemented or worked that out into Dutch law. So we first created a legislative basis, a new article in our national royal resolution on alternative fuels infrastructure. So we had that in public consultation last year, end of last year. Quite a few reactions. After that, we used those reactions to work out the regulation itself, where I will come back to later on. So that was very useful. So after that, we had, of course, the cabinet approval, the Council of State advice, again the cabinet, and now the king himself is hopefully willing to sign this legal basis, and then it will publish this month and will enter into force in July 2021. Then the regulation, which we will speak about more thoroughly now, we created a new article in the Dutch ministerial regulation on alternative fuels infrastructure. We quite recently had that in public consultation in February and March. We had 13 reactions, mainly market players, some sector organizations representing these market players, CPOs and service providers. So we used this consultation again to make a few adjustments to the obligation and to the explanation as well. And then, like I said, the State Secretary just approved it and signed the regulation, so it has been published today. It will enter into force July 2021, and for some provisions, this will be January 1st next year. Next slide, please. You already had it. Thank you. So like I said, we made a couple of adjustments after the last public consultation. I will get back to that later on as well. We made some exemptions regarding public charging stations on private locations. There were quite a few remarks on the energy supplier and the energy product and the percentage green energy delivered at the charging stations. And also we made an exemption regarding opening hours. There has been made a more clear distinction between what it means to provide information to individual users and to professional users. And we also more clearly mentioned the option of providing information by third parties, so more explicitly in the regulation. And last but not least, we merged and renamed some information categories due to the remarks that have been made. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the headlines in 3 slides. So we drafted an obligation for CPOs to provide charge point information that can be used by individual users, users of the charging stations. It should help them to find charging stations more easily, to be sure how they can charge, how they can pay, at what speed, what connectors, etc. And also, is it available at the moment? What are the ad hoc prices? The information can be provided directly. Oh, that's one slide too fast. Yes. So the information can be provided directly or by a third party. So this can be, for example, a data aggregator. It's about all publicly accessible charging stations, including those on private locations, with a few exemptions on the latter. So I will come back to that. It's about static information. So like I said, location, charge speed, percentage green energy. This last category, by the way, we added after remarks on that in the first public consultation. It was not in the initial concept, but we added that in a later stage. It's secondly about dynamic information, so occupation status, availability, ad hoc pricing. Next slide, please. The information should be provided in a non-discriminatory, easy and open way to individual users, like I said, and this can be done via own websites or apps like we already know them in the market, or by apps of a third party again. And to professional users, it's important that this information or data should be available also via open protocols and formats. And like Hilke already mentioned, the online location of a link to this information should be findable via the national access point, alongside with a description of the data and conditions for access or use if they are applicable. Next slide, please. So last few things. The information, of course, must be accurate, complete and up to date. For dynamic info, this means it needs to be updated within 1 minute after a status change. So in that case, we are a bit more ambitious than in the case of IDACS, probably. We don't know the final outcome yet, but this might be the case. And we've done that to give maximum comfort to the EV driver. When it comes to static data, the info may be updated within 1 day after a status change. The regulation, like has been said, it will enter into force the 1st of July 2021 with an exemption for information on energy supplier, product and percentage green energy. And opening hours, this information can be provided the 1st of January 2022. We've decided to create an exemption for these categories, also due to remarks in the consultation. And the regulator, the ACM, will enforce the obligations. So I will now go into a few elements more deeply. I will further explain them, but first I think we have a little poll to see what kind of elements you're most interested in. So maybe you could fill that in again. So all right, so I think the polls are slowly closing. Okay, so mainly about the functioning of the NAP and the accurate, complete, updated information. All right, I'll make sure to touch on that for sure. So can we go back to the presentation then again? All right, so here's a quick overview of the information categories that are obligatory to provide to the users. So I won't mention them all, but like you see, it's static information and dynamic information. So charge speeds, socket types, etc., payment methods. All right, next slide. Like I said, it's an obligation for CPOs, but it can also be filled in by a third party. So that's an important element. Since we see that this is already the case in the market at the moment. We decided to include also the charging stations on private locations, for example, in parking garages, hotels, restaurants, etc. Since we see this is a more and more important category of charging stations, and we want to make them visible in navigation apps and other information products for users. It would be a shame not to use them. We did, however, make a few exemptions regarding these stations on private locations. Also regarding, also because of remarks made in the consultation. So the first one is that if the station is not operated by a professional CPO that has the right systems for this digital exchange of charge point information, then that won't be an obligation to provide the information on these charging stations. Also, if the station owner doesn't want to be or doesn't want the charging station to be found in these navigation apps, since, for example, it wants to keep the charging station for their own customers, then we say, okay, that's all right. You don't need to provide information on those stations then. We also don't oblige to information to be provided on stations at a private property near a house, since this could lead to privacy issues. You could see, for example, whether someone's at home or not. So that's not desirable. And lastly, we said there's no obligation to provide information on energy supplier, energy products, and the percentage of sustainable energy, since there are some difficulties for the CPOs to gather this information. They're not always the one with the energy contract. Next slide, please. So there we come at the point of accurate, complete, and updated information. So basically, we describe this in a very generic way, I must admit. So what we say is it must be accurate, complete, and updated, and we only specified that there needs to be a certain update frequency. We also included that in the regulation, in the articles themselves. I already mentioned them. And the detailed descriptions of the information categories that must be provided, they will be findable via the NAP. And those are the descriptions that are being worked out in the IDACS project. Next slide, please. So it must be provided in a non-discriminatory and easy, open way. So non-discriminatory, of course, everyone knows what this means. You can't serve one customer and the other not. So it needs to be available for all users and also all professional users. So in that way, we guarantee that all the charge point information is available for everyone. And for individual users, this means the information is to be provided via apps or websites. Can be your own or a third-party website, providing, for example, digital maps with charging stations and user information like we already know them in the market. and to professional users, again, via open protocols. And an important element I didn't mention before is that the CPO is allowed to set conditions for access or use. This was an important remark being made by some of the market players. They told us that they want to be sure that the information is not misused. There is a possibility to set conditions for access. These conditions may, of course, not be unreasonable or discriminating or de facto hinder the development of information services for charge point users, since that is the goal of the regulation. Next slide, please. And the functioning of the national access points. So Hilke already told you a bit about it. So it's about providing the online location of a direct link to the data and the description of the data, and if so, conditions for access and use. It will be provided at the Nationaal Toegangspunt ITS. This is a portal already being used for various data categories, also in different fields, truck parking, intelligent transport systems information. So this can be done by the CPOs directly or by a third party. It has a register function, and important element. Also, this came up during the consultation, that the government won't become owner of or provider of the data. It will still be the case that the information exchange will take place between the CPO and the professional user. Like I said, you can set certain conditions to prevent misuse, for example. Next slide, please. And yeah, the regulation will enter into force 1st of July with an exemption for the information categories I already mentioned on energy, supply, use, product, and green energy, and also opening hours, since there are a few difficulties to gather this information already before the 1st of July. So we give a little bit more room for implementation. And then the role of the regulator will be that they can investigate after signals of users, for example, by when they get signals of missing or incorrect or outdated information. But of course, they can also decide on their own initiative to do a sector-wide inquiry. So I think that's about it. That was the last slide. Hopefully you're still alive. Was a lot of information. I didn't really follow questions that maybe came up in Slido, so maybe our
no problem, Stijn.
Our host can tell you. Okay.
Yes, up until now there are 3 questions. I will start with the first by Michelle Byings. This is about the public charging points on private locations. If the owner does not allow the CPO to provide the information, how can you be in line with the consumer regulations, as this requires location information in the transaction?
I don't. That's a very difficult question. I don't know exactly what kind of consumer regulation you're pointing at. Maybe I can look into that question later on and come back to that.
Will do. Then there is another question: when is a provider private and when is it professional? And is there a threshold from CPO perspective?
It's about the owner of the charging station. So it's not about how professional a CPO is. It's about the owner of the station. So if it's on a private location, so we really mean stations in the semi-public area. So like I said, restaurants, hotels, and for them it's more like a service, an extra service for the visitors, and we don't want to force them, for example, to make disproportionate investments in systems they do not have when they already installed 1 or 2 charging stations. So we want to keep it reasonable. So that's why we made a few exemptions, and we say, okay, only when these stations are already being operated by a professional CPO, which already has the systems to do so. So that's also comes forward from one of the remarks in the public consultation that we don't want to create unreasonable obligations.
Yes, thank you. Then there's one more question. Does the national access point support OCPI locations? This is also a more specific question.
Well, yeah, I have to think about that one. I think it's important to realize that the NAP itself won't provide information, so it will still be the CPO and the user of the information. So, and the only thing we say, it needs to be provided via open protocols, and if that's OCPI, if that's a protocol where you use to provide information on location and other categories, that's perfectly fine, and that's I think the protocol mainly used in the Netherlands. So in that case, I don't know if I understood the question right, but then the answer is yes. So we didn't prescribe one specific protocol. As long as it's open, non-proprietary, then it's okay.
Yeah. Maybe it's also good to elaborate a little bit more again on the national access point, that it is a data register. And for that reason, it's a register function. So it links from one to the other. And to get back to the previous question also on data quality, there are some requirements on data quality, but they're not integrated into the national access point. I see one more question here as well. Will foreign national access point act as a repository as well?
Yes, I can take that question. I think Paulina knows maybe a little bit better than I do, but we recently had a call again with all the participating countries within IDACS, and we see that most countries choose for a register form. Some of them choose for a data marketplace or a database, but it's mainly registers, so mainly the same form as we've chosen. Maybe it's good to mention that we've chosen this setup because we see that the market already fulfills a lot of the needs, and we don't see the necessity to take over this role from the government. So we only provide some safeguards now, making sure that all the information is there, but we don't want to interfere too much into the market. So that's why we chose this setup.